It began with a sound no one expected, a rusted door groaning open beneath layers of soil, a rush of stale air escaping from a sealed world. In the Bavarian Alps, a team of engineers widening a mountain road broke through to a hidden tunnel. Concrete walls, frost-lined, untouched since the last days of 1945. Inside were the remains of a forgotten Nazi research site, marked only by faint stenciled words, Project Silvershade. Scattered among the debris, handwritten logs, sealed metal canisters, and a single insignia burned into a crate, the black sun of the SS. What they found there would pull historians, soldiers, and scientists into one of the darkest and most secret corners of the war, a chapter that was never meant to be opened again. Chapter 1: Shadows Before the Storm. In the years before the world fell apart, Europe was holding its breath. The scars of the Great War had never truly healed, but life, in its stubborn way, went on. Families rebuilt their homes. Farmers sowed their fields again. Cities buzzed with the fragile rhythm of recovery. Yet beneath that surface, there was an unease no one could quite name. Old empires had crumbled. New ideologies were spreading like wildfire, and every border seemed to hum with quiet tension. Germany, stripped of pride and power after Versailles, simmered with resentment. Factories, once turned to weapons, now stood silent, their windows broken, their workers unemployed. In beer halls and public squares, anger found its voice, loud, persuasive, and dangerous. Adolf Hitler rose from that noise, promising revival. He offered certainty in a world filled with doubt. Across the continent, some saw him as a savior of German strength. Others recognized something far more menacing taking shape. By the mid-1930s, the machinery of war began to turn again. Discreetly at first, then boldly. The Luftwaffe took shape under false names. Tanks rolled through secret training grounds in the forests of Bavaria, and scientists whispered about new fields of research: radiation, biological endurance, human experimentation. The SS under Himmler began its quiet expansion into science, medicine, and ideology, merging mysticism with measurable cruelty. They spoke of purity, of control, of reshaping humanity itself. Ordinary Germans went about their lives, sensing change but never the full scale of it. Children joined the Hitler Youth and marched in tidy lines through cobblestone streets. Their parents listened to radio broadcasts that spoke of destiny and rebirth. Factories reopened, pay returned. National pride swelled, a pride built on fear and obedience. Beyond Germany's borders, leaders watched uneasily. Britain debated appeasement. France fortified its border with concrete and hope. In the East, Stalin's Soviet Union played its own ruthless game, crushing dissent while eyeing its neighbors. The United States, weary from the Depression, turned inward, wary of Europe's ghosts. It was in this fragile calm that a small circle within the SS began something extraordinary and terrifying. They called it Project Silberschatern, the Silver Shadow. Its goal, according to scattered notes later found in the Bavarian tunnels, was to explore the limits of human endurance under extreme altitude and oxygen deprivation. The pretense was aviation medicine. The reality, far darker. The Reich's obsession with scientific supremacy found fertile ground in forgotten alpine bunkers. Requisitioned hospitals quietly disappeared from maps. Doctors vanished into new research divisions under the Reich Main Security Office. Behind locked doors, subjects were tested under thin air, extreme cold, and chemical exposure. Data meant to aid Luftwaffe pilots but crossing every moral boundary imaginable. As Europe drifted toward war, these hidden laboratories expanded. Records indicate coordination between industrial giants, IG Farben, Messerschmitt, Siemens, and SS medical departments. Every discovery fed the same machine: efficiency, performance, control. Outside, the world was still dancing on the edge of disaster. The 1936 Olympics dazzled Berlin in a glow of propaganda. Visitors saw flags, smiles, and order, not the quiet hum of engines deep in mountain bunkers or the train cars already ferrying political prisoners to camps. The deception worked. The world wanted peace, and Germany gave them spectacle, but silence has a way of hiding the worst truths. The men and women who worked beneath those peaks, behind steel doors and falsified medical logs, believed they were building a new frontier of knowledge. Many would later claim they were patriots, not monsters, but as one captured German scientist wrote years later, We did not ask what the research was for, only that it pleased those above us. By the time the war finally erupted in 1939, the groundwork had already been laid. Laboratories expanded, funding flowed, experiments multiplied under the banner of necessity. The silver shadow grew, unseen, unrecorded, and unaccountable. In London, Paris, Moscow, the storm everyone feared finally broke. But in the mountains of Bavaria, beneath layers of rock and secrecy, another war had already begun. Not for land or ideology, but for control over life itself. The kind of war that leaves no headlines, only echoes, waiting, decades later, for someone to uncover the door that should have never been opened. Chapter 2. The Descent into Obsession. When Hitler's armies marched across Europe, the world saw tanks, parades, and the terrifying precision of the blitzkrieg. What it didn't see, what it was never meant to see, was the scientific crusade unfolding behind the front lines. While soldiers fought and cities burned, teams of doctors, engineers, and physicists worked deep inside hidden facilities, chasing a new kind of victory, mastery over the human body and the elements themselves. By 1941, the SS had grown into more than an army or police force. It was an ideology, a state within a state. Under Himmler's orders, its research divisions expanded, merging medical science with racial doctrine. The logic was cold, methodical. If they could control the limits of human endurance, they could control the future soldier, the future of the species. The program was split across multiple fronts, each cloaked under different names. Project Silbershade was one of them, operating out of fortified tunnels in southern Germany, using prisoners from nearby camps as subjects for high altitude. And low-pressure studies. Documents, recovered decades later, describe sessions conducted in sealed chambers simulating flight beyond 15,000 meters. Some subjects were pilots, others political prisoners chosen for their silence. Notes written in a precise, clinical German record heart rates, convulsions, and termination times. The handwriting never wavers. To the men who wrote them, these weren't people. They were data points. Meanwhile, the war machine demanded results. As Allied bombers began to strike deeper into the Reich, the Luftwaffe sought any advantage it could find. Higher altitude, faster recovery, more resilient crews. Field Marshal Milch demanded breakthroughs. The SS promised them. Researchers from the Ahnenerbe, the Nazi Ancestral Heritage Institute, joined forces with medical officers and physicists. It was no longer about survival or defense. It was about proving superiority at any cost. Inside these hidden laboratories, there was a strange duality. Scientists debated equations over coffee, while in the next room, screams echoed through steel corridors. They logged observations with the detachment of men convinced their work served something larger. One technician, whose diary was found years later in a Munich attic, wrote, "The chambers make no noise after pressure drop. Silence returns, and we continue calculations. I sleep without dreams." Outside, the tide of war began to turn. The invasion of the Soviet Union faltered under the brutal Russian winter. Stalingrad became a graveyard of German ambition. Supplies dwindled. But within the SS hierarchy, desperation only fueled further experimentation. When the front began collapsing, resources shifted inward into secret projects designed to secure a final advantage. Silbershade expanded its reach, experimenting with oxygen synthesis, tissue regeneration, and high-altitude ejection systems. Few outside the SS knew what these projects truly entailed. Those who did often vanished, reassigned, imprisoned, or executed under vague charges of security breach. In Allied intelligence reports, faint whispers of bunker research began appearing in late 1944. MI6 analysts referenced sealed medical installations in southern Germany, but with the war's chaos, the leads were buried under more immediate concerns. And so, the tunnels continued. Experiments intensified as Allied troops crossed into German territory. As the Reich collapsed, orders were given to destroy all materials and seal the entrances. Explosives were planted. Files burned. The last entries in the Silbershade logbooks date to April 28, 1945, just days before Hitler's suicide. They end abruptly with two words, stamped in red ink. Versiegelt. Ewige Pflicht. Sealed. Eternal duty. But sealed does not mean forgotten. In the following decades, the world moved on. Germany rebuilt. The Cold War began. the atrocities of the camps came to light, but the smaller programs, the secret medical and engineering divisions, faded into obscurity. Often hidden beneath the flood of reconstruction and geopolitical rivalry, Western intelligence agencies quietly absorbed the remnants of Nazi science. Operation Paperclip brought dozens of former German scientists to America. The Soviet Union captured others. Their research, stripped of origin and ethics, fed into a new arms race: rockets, jet engines, biological tests, and the edge of what humans could endure in space or nuclear war. Somewhere in that transition, the memory of Silvershade disappeared. The tunnels beneath the Alps were buried, the documents classified or destroyed. For decades, the site was a myth, a rumor traded between historians and ex-military analysts. And yet, in 2023, when the mountains gave up their secret, the evidence was undeniable. The door, sealed in concrete and time, had held fast for nearly 80 years. Behind it lay a story, not of victory or defeat, but of obsession, of men so consumed by the pursuit of control that they lost sight of humanity itself. The world had seen the bombs, the tanks, the destruction, but now it would finally face the silence that came after. Chapter 3. The Silence Beneath the Mountains. The war's final year was chaos. Across Germany, cities were in flames, rail lines torn apart, and communication breaking down. But high in the Bavarian Alps, the world still obeyed a brutal order. In a network of tunnels carved deep into the mountain rock, guards kept watch under flickering lamps. Scientists in grey uniforms moved through narrow corridors, their footsteps echoing off damp concrete. Outside, artillery thundered in the distance, the Reich collapsing one border at a time. Inside, the work continued, as if the war itself were just background noise. The entrance to the Silbershade facility was disguised as a storage depot for aviation fuel. Beneath that facade lay 5 descending levels, each sealed by reinforced steel. Air compressors hissed, pressure chambers thrummed. The sound was constant, mechanical breathing in the mountain's chest. Prisoners brought from Dachau worked in silence, hauling crates, cleaning floors, maintaining equipment they barely understood. Few lasted long. Records suggest most were retired after 3 to 4 weeks. The term, cold and bureaucratic, hides what everyone there knew. Retirement meant death. In March 1945, as Allied bombers shattered Munich and Nuremberg, a final directive arrived from Berlin. The order, signed by an SS general whose name was later redacted, instructed all research teams to complete remaining experiments and secure results for transfer to Northern Command. Translation: destroy the evidence, save the knowledge. The leading scientist, Dr. Klaus Reinhardt, had no intention of letting his life's work vanish. His journals, recovered decades later in fragments, show a man torn between loyalty, ambition, and growing dread. "We are at the edge of something extraordinary," he wrote. "To lose it now would be betrayal of progress itself." He ordered the data duplicated onto microfilm, sealed in lead containers, and hidden within the mountain walls. Meanwhile, the last experiments pressed forward. Subjects were placed inside altitude chambers, their oxygen cut to simulate stratospheric conditions. Outside, technicians recorded pulse, respiration, and collapse times. Some begged, others went quietly, too weak to resist. Reinhardt's notes speak clinically. Subject expired at 17,400 meters simulated altitude. Ocular rupture observed. Brain hypoxia complete. He wrote those words as the Reich itself died. On April 25, 1945, with Allied forces advancing through Bavaria, the bunker prepared for evacuation. Documents, samples, and reels of film were loaded into military trucks bound for an airstrip outside Innsbruck. Only one convoy made it out before the mountain pass was destroyed by retreating Wehrmacht units. The rest remained sealed underground. Reinhardt and a handful of scientists volunteered to stay behind to finish the shutdown. Their decision was a death sentence. When American forces entered the area weeks later, the entire complex had vanished from maps. Locals spoke of explosions in the night, of tremors rolling through the valleys. The entrances were buried under tons of rock and debris. The war ended days later, and with it, the trail of Silbershade disappeared. In the years that followed, US intelligence teams scoured captured archives for any trace of the project. Operation Alsos recovered fragments, medical reports with missing pages, coded references to altitude adaptation protocols. But the location of the main facility remained unknown. The mountains kept their silence. It wasn't until nearly 80 years later that a road construction crew stumbled upon that rusted steel door. It had been sealed from the inside. Behind it, air as cold as death rushed out, carrying the faint smell of oil and decay. Inside, the passageways were intact, untouched since 1945. On the walls, the markings still read Abteilung 5, Human Physik. Human Physics. Teams from the German Historical Institute and the Bundesarchiv moved in cautiously. What they found stunned even veteran investigators. Pressure chambers stood frozen in time. Glass observation windows were cracked but unbroken. Piles of research logs, some water-damaged but legible, filled a room labelled Archivraum A. Among them, Reinhardt's microfilm reels, the very ones he'd sealed in lead containers. When experts developed the film, they discovered images of experiments in progress, grainy, silent and horrifying. Figures in SS uniforms adjusting gauges, a man seated inside a sealed chamber, wires attached to his temples, then a sudden drop in pressure and stillness. The footage lasted less than 3 minutes, but it was enough to confirm what many historians had long suspected. The Luftwaffe's high-altitude survival data came at a human cost too terrible to admit. Forensic teams found skeletal remains in 2 of the lower tunnels, their positions suggesting they died attempting to seal the facility. One skeleton still wore the insignia of an SS medical officer. Next to him lay a rusted pistol, a single casing on the floor, a suicide perhaps, or an execution. When news of the discovery broke, governments scrambled to respond. The German Defense Ministry denied any modern connection to the site. The US and Russia issued brief statements, both acknowledging awareness of wartime experimentation, but offering no further comment. Independent researchers soon uncovered files declassified under Operation Paperclip, linking early American aerospace medicine to data suspiciously similar to that described in Reinhardt's reports. The line between captured research and stolen horror blurred. The mountain had given back its secret, but not its peace. Even now, locals say the tunnels are haunted by silence, not by ghosts, but by something heavier. The kind of silence that comes after the final scream has faded, after history has chosen to forget. Standing in that dark corridor today, the air still carries the faint metallic tang of oxygen tanks and cold stone. The walls bear scratches, initials, numbers, fragments of words. The scientists are long gone. Their empire collapsed, but their work survived in data tables, in flight manuals, in the unspoken legacy of every nation that used that knowledge to push a little higher, fly a little farther, endure a little longer. The silver shadow never truly ended. It was buried, waiting for the day the world would finally dig deep enough to find it again. Chapter 4. The Reckoning in the Dust. When the doors to the mountain finally opened, the air that escaped was like a breath from another world, cold, metallic, and heavy with time. The discovery of the Silbershade tunnels sent shockwaves through the academic and political landscape. For weeks, teams of historians, forensic experts, and journalists descended on the site under heavy security. Floodlights pierced the dark halls, revealing rows of rusted instruments and crumbling notes written in a precise, almost mechanical hand. It felt less like entering history, and more like intruding on something that had been intentionally buried. A secret never meant for daylight. Among the debris, investigators found fragments of personal items, a pocket watch frozen at 10:14, a child's photograph folded and tucked behind a rusted valve, a woman's earring half melted into the floor. They were small, fragile reminders that the story of Silbershade wasn't only about scientists and soldiers. It was about people, lives taken, erased, or used as statistics in the name of progress. Each discovery carried a weight that no data could justify. The forensic reports were grim. Bone samples showed signs of barometric trauma, the telltale burst patterns consistent with rapid decompression. Analysis of the air chambers confirmed the conditions were designed to exceed survivable altitudes. One investigator, speaking off record, described the scene as a museum of cruelty preserved by the cold. But even as the truth surfaced, not everyone wanted it told. Documents began disappearing, some from the excavation site, others from government archives. Leaked correspondence hinted at quiet pressure from multiple nations, each wary of what might emerge if the data linked too closely to post-war research programs. Every superpower took something from Germany, one historian remarked. What they didn't take, they buried. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. Some called for open trials and formal recognition of the victims, arguing that scientific benefit built on atrocity could never be justified. Others demanded restraint, not to rewrite history, but to protect what they called technological legacy. The debate wasn't new. It was the same argument whispered in laboratories after the war, the same compromise that had allowed so many of these men to quietly resettle under new names. As excavation continued, attention shifted to Dr. Klaus Reinhardt. His journals, now translated and published, revealed a chilling rationality. He never described his work as torture, only as necessity. He wrote of duty, of serving human advancement beyond politics. In one entry, dated April 20th, 1945, he wrote, "When knowledge is born from suffering, history will decide whether it was worth the pain. But history forgets quickly." He was right about one thing. History did forget, or perhaps chose to. Families of the victims began arriving at the site once the initial investigation ended. Many had no graves to visit, no official record of their relatives' deaths. They stood in silence near the sealed tunnel entrances, lighting candles that flickered in the mountain wind. A few survivors from nearby camps, now in their late 90s, attended too. One woman, her voice trembling, said to the cameras, "They used our breath to reach the sky." Then she turned away, refusing to say more. The German government issued a formal statement acknowledging the discovery and vowing full transparency. But transparency is a fragile word. Within months, the deeper tunnels were closed to the public, labeled unstable. Access required federal clearance. Researchers protested, warning that sealing them again would erase crucial evidence. Officials insisted it was for safety. For some, it felt like history repeating itself, a cover-up wrapped in bureaucracy. Yet, despite attempts to control the narrative, the world had seen enough. Documentaries aired, academic journals filled with cautious analyses. Museums requested artifacts, oxygen masks, logbooks, fragments of the chambers, to display under the title, "Science and the Shadow of War." The story resonated not because it was shocking, but because it felt familiar. Every era has its Silvershade, its project cloaked in secrecy, its pursuit of knowledge untethered from conscience. Meanwhile, in quiet offices across Europe and the United States, scientists re-examined the foundations of their fields. Aerospace medicine, pressure physiology, even modern astronaut training, all carried traces of data whose origins were now tainted. For many, it was a reckoning long overdue. Some called for the immediate removal of any findings derived from Nazi research. Others argued that erasing them would mean letting the victims die twice. Once in the chamber, and once in memory, one chilling revelation came from declassified NATO files indicating that portions of Reinhardt's data had been copied by Allied intelligence in 1947 and stored under a project known as Citrine. These documents, cross-referenced with US Air Force archives, showed uncanny similarities to high-altitude pilot endurance studies from the 1950s. There was no direct admission, but the lineage was unmistakable. In the press, the story became a symbol, not of the past, but of the uneasy marriage between science and morality. It forced a new generation to ask hard questions. How far can progress go before it ceases to be human? Can knowledge born in cruelty ever truly serve good? When the research teams finally left the mountain, they sealed the entrances once more, not with explosives this time, but with reinforced steel gates. Above them, they placed a single plaque, written in 3 languages. It read, "Here in darkness, the boundaries of humanity were tested. May they never be crossed again." As the snow began to fall that winter, the mountain returned to silence. The lights faded, the machines rusted, and the tunnels disappeared beneath ice and shadow. But those who had walked inside could never unsee what they found. The past, once buried, had surfaced, and with it came the uneasy truth that forgetting is never the same as forgiveness. Chapter 5. The Legacy of Shadows. Decades have passed since the mountain was opened, yet the echoes of what lay beneath it still linger. Historians now speak of Silvershade as both a discovery and a warning, a reminder that progress, unmoored from ethics, always casts a shadow. The story has left a mark not only on the pages of history, but on the conscience of every nation that once fought for, or profited from, the spoils of that war. In the years following the revelation, debates reignited in universities, parliaments, and international courts. Should the data gathered through human suffering be erased, or preserved as evidence. Some argued that to destroy it would mean denying history itself. Others countered that keeping it, even for science, meant complicity in its origins. There was no easy answer. The truth, like the mountain, remained immovable, cold, unyielding, and carved from human hands. For Germany, confronting Silberschatten became another step in its long and painful reckoning. Exhibits opened across the country. School programs were updated to include the story. The site, though sealed to the public, became a pilgrimage for scholars and descendants of victims. Each year, on the anniversary of its discovery, candles were placed at the steel gates, their light flickering against the snow. Some came to mourn, others came to understand, all left in silence. Beyond Europe, the ripples spread further. In the United States, Freedom of Information requests uncovered documents showing that fragments of Reinhardt's research had indeed influenced post-war aerospace medicine. There were memos, polite, clinical, noting the usefulness of German data in understanding pilot survival at high altitudes. No mention was made of how that data was obtained. For the first time, nations had to face the uncomfortable truth that victory in war had not been purely moral. It had been pragmatic, opportunistic, and selective in its memory. In Russia, similar revelations surfaced. Files once hidden in KGB archives described the capture of German scientists relocated to the Urals, continuing oxygen adaptation studies well into the 1950s. It seemed the ghosts of Silberschatten had crossed every border, absorbed into the machinery of a new conflict, the Cold War. Competing ideologies, but the same hunger for control over life itself. And yet, amid the politics and the blame, something quieter endured. Remembrance. Survivors and families of the victims began compiling testimonies, determined to give names to the anonymous figures listed only as subjects. Their stories, recorded in trembling voices, painted a picture no datasheet ever could, of fear, confusion, and defiance in the face of unspeakable violation. "We were told it was for the future," one man recalled, his eyes wet but steady. "They said we were helping pilots breathe higher. I remember thinking, I can't even breathe now." These testimonies became the backbone of a global archive, an effort to humanize the history science had once sterilized. Universities partnered with museums to create digital reconstructions of the tunnels, allowing visitors to explore them virtually, to walk where the victims walked, to see the instruments, the chambers, the notes, not to sensationalize, but to ensure that knowledge would never again come at the cost of humanity. In the end, the legacy of Silberschatten is not just a story about war. It's about choice. The choices made by scientists who valued discovery over dignity, and by nations that looked the other way when that knowledge became convenient. It's about the thin line between curiosity and cruelty, and the ease with which one can masquerade as the other. One of the archaeologists who first entered the site said in an interview, "It wasn't the machines that disturbed me the most, it was the handwriting, so neat, so calm, as if they were documenting a routine, not suffering." That detail captures everything. The quiet normalcy of evil when it hides behind procedure, the banality of what we later call atrocity, and so, the story endures. Not as a chapter to be closed, but as a mirror. Every nation, every institution that reaches for the unknown must look into it, because Silberschatten was never just a Nazi project. It was a human one, a reminder that intelligence, power, and innovation mean nothing without empathy to guide them. Today, the mountain stands silent again. Snow buries the entrances, and the wind hums faintly through the trees. There are no guards, no scientists, no prisoners. Only the steady pulse of time reclaiming what men once tried to control. But beneath that stillness, the echo remains. Not of machines or orders, but of breath. The breath of those who could not survive the altitude humanity demanded of them. And if you listen closely, in the pauses between the wind, you can almost hear what history forgot to write. That progress without conscience is not advancement. It's descent. Silberschatten is gone, but its shadow lingers, a permanent mark on the edge of human ambition. A reminder whispered by the mountains themselves, that there are places knowledge should never have to go, and prices it should never again demand to be paid.